This week, Ricard Carlson from Detectify is with us to discuss a funeral for vulnerability management. Then Will Clark from Excella joins us to talk about architecture and security in the trenches. Finally, in the enterprise security news, 1Password plans to do some shopping with their massive Series C. Devo announces a $250 million round. Permiso Security and Tromso emerge, backed by both traditional VCs and industry execs. STG spins out McAfee's mVision XDR product as Trellix, the first of many spinouts, they say. Microsoft reminds us that in addition to being the industry's largest security vendor, they can also drop $70 billion on video games if they feel like it. More reminders that open source is essential, but orgs with massive budgets will still treat it as worthless and disposable. Real-world stories of CI/CD pipeline compromises, is Uber's former CISO going to jail, and Tom Brady NFTs, all that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. Attackers are only getting more proficient, so how can you proactively adapt your cybersecurity strategy? Core Security by Help Systems helps you uncover and prioritize the risks that pose the biggest threat to your organization. Core Impact is a penetration testing tool that safely finds and exploits vulnerabilities using the same techniques as attackers. You can conduct advanced pen tests with ease using certified exploits and automations. Take your engagements to the next level by pairing with Cobalt Strike, a threat emulation tool ideal for adversary simulations and red team operations. Learn more at securityweekly.com/core security.
Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and Happy Cheese Lovers Day. This is episode 257, recorded on Thursday, January 20th, 2022. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is Tyler Shields. What is your favorite cheese?
All of the cheeses. Honestly, I love all cheeses. I'm a huge cheese guy. But if I had to pick one, I'd probably go with like a super extra sharp cheddar.
Oh wow, okay. Go in that direction, not the creamy, milder direction.
Gotcha. I like the creamy and milder, but a little bit, quite a bit drier, sharper, I think is more my palate.
Also joining me is Katie Teitler. Cheese. What do you think, Katie? Are you a cheese lover?
I am with Tyler on being a cheese lover. Exonia sent us a winter gift box a month or so ago, and it had a cheese board with a whole bunch of different cheeses and some delicious jam to go with it. And my boyfriend hates cheese, so it's like score. I get to eat all the cheese.
Perfect. For me, I remember the first day I was working on the job in a nice Italian restaurant. As a teenager, I lucked out, got a job there. And like the quality of ingredients they had was like nothing I had ever tasted. It was like having mozzarella for the first time. It was amazing. All right. One announcement here. Let's see. We have to modify this a little bit. So today, we did a great webinar on building your own security lab at home. That will be available on demand shortly. And so you can still register for that. You can still watch it on demand. And then join us February 16th to learn about validation techniques within applications. Finally, join us March 2nd to learn 5 things you can do to catch more bad guys. To register for any of these webcasts, you can visit securityweekly.com/webcasts. And for the ones that have already completed, you can go to securityweekly.com/on-demand. All right, today's interview is sponsored by Detectify. And today we're talking about the death of vulnerability management. Don't roll your eyes yet. Give us a minute or two to get into it and explain. And we're excited to have Ricard Carlson, co-founder and CEO of Detectify, with us today. I hope I'm saying that in a way that you would recognize as your name.
More than accurate, I would say. So definitely.
Okay. Welcome, Ricard. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm good. And by the way, I would say manchego.
Yeah, that's a good one. So many good cheeses out there. It's my sister is vegan and has my birthday gift was literally a gift certificate for vegan cheeses and butters to a company that makes vegan cheeses and butters. And not terrible, but not cheese. Not the same.
But I guess maybe, it's a good enough substitute potentially.
Yeah, so I'm not sure we went in too much into your background. Maybe tell us a little bit about how you came to start Detectify as one of the co-founders. I think that would be a great place to start.
My background was not in security in the way that many others, but I came from I'm a technical background, but then I was introduced to my technical co-founders that had started writing the prototype of Detectify, and they're really strong white hats, and they had been hacking on large responsible and different type of responsible disclosure programs, and found a way to automate their own lives, and started to say, if you can hack these companies on responsible disclosure programs on weekends, why couldn't you maybe automate a lot of these methodologies into a product? Because back in the days, 6-7 years ago, companies were, they applied a lot of the different then, as the title of this program, vulnerability management methods. And I think Qualys was the king of security testing, but there were so much vulnerabilities out there that my team and we've started to find on the weekends and said, maybe there is something missing here, actually.
Yeah, and we should clarify, Detectify and what we're talking about today when we talk about vulnerability management, we're going to be focusing heavily on the AppSec side of things, correct?
Yeah. And the idea, I think, with this is you can, there is a big side of vulnerability management and server software, but I think look a few years ahead, I think the bottom part of the stack will be almost gone. If you look at the trends, how much new things are built by serverless and Dockerized versions? I would say almost any new solution is being built that way, and the bottom stack is diminishing and will be stayed at maybe for legacy systems.
Yeah, and the bottom stack you're talking about, like the OS level, the infrastructure level, firmware, all that kind of stuff that as we get more and more SaaS and PaaS, that infrastructure layer starts to go away.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Please come on.
Yeah, and I've been recently trying to learn more about Web3, and it's interesting because some of the same issues are there, but for the most part, there's a lot of services. A lot of that infrastructure layer stuff is not there with Web3 technologies.
No, of course not. And the way that if you look and the way that we see organizations is also, they might be running a vulnerability management program and they get notified about, and I talked to an organization last week. They said, okay, we ran one of these products and we got 100,000 CVE notifications. What should I do with that? I have 100,000 of them. Where do I even start? So, and I think that is also because what is exposed, what can actually create impact for me. I think that's what's create a lot of problems for organizations. And this also, if you then also add to this, that this is on the place, things that as you're now allowing all the teams and organizations, in-house teams to move much faster, you give them much more freedom. And suddenly you don't know if you have your stuff on AWS or Azure. I talked to another organization, I think a few weeks ago, that said the way that we try to figure out if someone is using Azure in our company is that we scan for billing emails that comes from Azure into our email inboxes. I said, okay.
Yeah. I've often heard that using invoices and the accounting side of things to as a solution for shadow IT, for example,
to see your attack surface.
Right. Yeah. And it's great. It works because mostly works. There still are some freemium services out there. There's open source software, so you're not going to get all of it. By looking at the bills. that the company is paying. But yeah, you'll get a lot of it. So let's talk a bit about vulnerability management. Especially in the last decade. As cloud has become more common, as DevOps processes have become more common, vulnerability management, as an activity, has changed to where it's less and less a standalone activity in especially in cloud-first organizations, right?
I mean, I think it comes from, it had a very good place, and it came, a lot of the practices in security came from, I would think, methods of that you needed to do it. And it came from compliance regulatory, from, for example, PCI, or that you were regulated by maybe HIPAA or something similar that said that you need to have this in place. But if you then look at the efficiency and, the way and the value of the results that the organization are seeing, I think it's less and less. I had another organization that said, yeah, we have to run it because our headquarter bank, of course, requires to it, and it says in our documents, but I haven't received anything that has been valuable for me for the past 2 years. And then I'm starting to say, okay, so you're employing a lot of these resources into tooling and works that are clearly not actually providing value for you. And then on the other side, you're starting to see that the way that organizations are being attacked is most likely not more or less to this, and it's more through that there's misconfiguration. So there's things that in the new world, your DNS is the center, not your IP range. And when you're starting to look at vulnerability management, it's very focused on the old IP range. I have my servers in my basement, and how does it really give you value and product value in the modern environment in the cloud?
Yeah, definitely. So, I think that's a good lead in to, talk about one of the things that you're doing that's, I think, fairly new in the industry as a product category, which is discovering attack surface.
Yeah, because, if you think about the old world of vulnerability management, that means that you very much need to know what you have. You need to know where things are located, because many of them are based on some sort of an agent, or at least that you have control of the software. But when you're starting to say, when an organization starts to, so to say, spread out their infrastructure, and we work very much with cloud native type of organizations, what controls everything in their infrastructure is the DNS. That's a central part. And I think different levels of sophistication in organizations are that some has figured this out, that the DNS is actually the center nowadays. And some is like treating it as something that is very unregulated. And then suddenly you start to get, your DNS pointers to be everywhere, and in some cases nowhere. And you don't have actually a central understanding of what your surface is.
Yeah. So, and I think that's a shift in thinking for a lot of organizations. I think, traditionally, maybe DevOps is a little bit better at it, at, putting together the framework for discovering and monitoring things ahead of time. For a lot of other folks, especially as someone with a pen tester background, like part of my job as a pen tester was reminding people that they had things that they had forgotten about years ago. And I constantly hear things like, oh, yeah, we set that up for proof of concept and never took it down. Or, yeah, we actually moved off that application, but never took that last step of decommissioning the systems, or the website and taking it offline. And that was something you'd hear in almost every engagement.
And then you can say, okay, I think, and then you start to look at, okay, you have maybe an organization that acquires a lot of companies through M&A, and you have all these spread out resources that you barely know where they're located. Okay, good luck on running some static code analysis tool where you barely know where things are being hosted. And I think this is where this new type of outside in view comes very much into play, because it could have been a marketing campaign running in Spain as three summers ago, and then you had an agency that did something there for you, and you're a pharmaceutical company. And you can say, could this be really so bad? But I think it was fairly proven that one of the biggest hacks, the Sony PlayStation hack, happened through a 2-year-old campaign site in Sony Thailand. But that was the way in.
Yeah. Yeah. So, one of the things I'm interested in here, I've actually looked at a lot of the products in the space, and I can see a future when, we call it attack surface management. I kind of think of it more as keeping track of your external assets. So it's an extension of asset management for me, and then an extension by relation, an extension of vulnerability management. And for some of these products, I can see these replacing the traditional external vulnerability scan, pretty soon in the future, if not already. Is that a goal? Is that a direction that you're headed in with your surface monitoring product?
Partially, I think we will be able to replace it for the modern company. Actually, in the way that we see it, we don't have that high ambitions to implement all the CVE tests that are there today, because I don't think that, and for compliance reasons, organizations needs to keep this. But when you're starting to look at, you will never find a CVE for a CloudFront or a Cloudflare misconfiguration, or that you have done something. And I think that is where this space is heading, but we're also moving towards a place, I think, to be proactive in security, because we have a company that says, I don't want to have Nginx exposed, because I know that Nginx will always have a new vulnerability. It comes on a regular basis, but I trust Amazon ELBs because they are so slimmed down and locked down. So if you find an Nginx naked on the internet, please tell me about it and notify, and so that I can make sure that I then put an ELB in front of it. And of course, this could be done from the inside, from maybe looking at your AWS configurations, but maybe you have a setup with an M&A, you're fairly distributed organizations where you actually don't have the ability to connect into all of these because you don't have that access to the infrastructure. And I think then, so it becomes like a combination of vulnerability management, or not vulnerability, but external scans and external testing, but also partially policy controls. Because organizations don't want to end up, fighting and trying to hunt for the latest vulnerability. They want to try to say, this is how I would like my security posture to look like, and please help me maintain that.
Yeah, in the process, you make a good point of there not being any CVEs when AWS has a vulnerability, because, like in the case,
it could be a misconfiguration that you have made something a mistake. So it's actually not really a vulnerability, but it makes you vulnerable.
Exactly. Like an OpenS3 bucket, it isn't a vulnerability. That's a configuration mistake.
Yeah.
But earlier, I saw a couple new AWS vulnerabilities that actually let you peer into customer data across tenancies. Was discovered by a vendor, and by the time we all find out about it, it's fixed for 100% of customers because AWS runs all of it. And compare that with Log4j, where we'll probably still be finding vulnerable systems years from now, because it runs in the customer environment, and it's not not as organized or well managed than a cloud, I guess.
No, and in many cases that will be, I think it's been a quite long story now for Log4j, but that will never be, I guess, 100% fixed, because it will be almost impossible to identify all location that is actually being running. Of course, when you have access to the source code, then you can fairly easily find it. But what for all the things that are maybe legacy or compiled systems that you barely know what is actually running?
So what else do we need here? What other ingredients do we need, for modern vulnerability management? I know there's a lot of options out there. There's WAFs, there's DAST, there's SAST, there's SCA, and then there's the traditional scanners, of course, like have some smattering of that stuff in them. They have some simple DAST capabilities in them, in addition to just looking for known CVEs.
Detectify used to be 100%, okay, let's build DAST, let's maybe put DAST into development pipelines. So we even actually built an API fuzzer with DAST methodologies that you could start to feed with Postman collection files to instrument the API fuzzers. But we realized we don't think that's the way that the organization should be doing things. The way that when we started to talk to people is the efforts versus value to maintaining this is very, very high. And because when you get the modern architecture that is so microservice operated, it's only API based, you have a completely different set of vulnerabilities that I don't think maybe DAS tools are the best to be able to identify. So the way that we actually saw it and thinking it is that, I mean, early in the pipeline, I think you must be running your static code analysis or your software composition analysis. But then we're seeing organizations trying so hard to get a DAS tool into a pipeline. And we realized that, I mean, we tried it and we worked with it, but it doesn't really operate well with the modern architectures. So that's why we said, okay, I think DAS tools should move into the perimeter and into the production environment. And instead of trying to say, oh, I'm going to try to find every vulnerability before it reaches production, rather say, if something is found in production, let's make sure that I have really, really fast feedback loops so I can fix it in a matter of hours instead of weeks or maybe hopefully days that some organizations are.
30, 60, 90 days.
Yeah, I mean, I think isn't PCI allowing you to have a critical vulnerability for 30 days or is it 60 days and you still can maintain compliance? But when you have these modern, fully integrated development teams, they're, staging and production is just the same thing. It's just a matter of feature flags. I think in that world, things that you can run fast on code should be part of your pipelines. And then dynamic tools like attack surface type of tools like Detectify that then is both an attack surface and a type of DAS in combination should be running 100% on production environments. And you should optimize getting that information to an engineer fast and patch it fast. Because that's when I think that's the way that you're going to win in the future.
And that's I think that's a big change for a lot of organizations. I often talk to companies and advise them on vulnerability management. And, often they're scratching their heads when you're explaining to them, look, here's what cloud first companies are doing. Here's what modern vulnerability management looks like, and once you talk about like getting this stuff fixed same day, their heads are just like,
yeah.
How can that happen before the weekly meeting where we go over the spreadsheet? How could it get fixed? They're not even going to know until at least a week after the vulnerability is discovered in some cases. So, I mean, how do you advise people, kind of down that new path where, it's tough. Do you have any suggestions?
I guess I'm not we're not a process implementer, but in some cases we have to. Yeah. I mean, it's quite often that we had a conversation with an organization, a very large company, a few weeks ago or a few months ago. And we said they came to us and said, "Hey, we want to buy a DAS tool to run in a staging environment." And we said, "I think that's a completely waste of your time." We said it directly straight through them. And actually, a few months later, they came back and said, "No, we actually want to buy an attack surface product to run in production environments because what you're telling makes sense in the way that we are moving forward and the way that how we want to work with frequent releases and how we want to also, get the information directly into the engineering teams and also make sure that they also have the responsibility and feel the responsibility of what's being live in production."
So, Adrian, I have a quick question for Ricard here. So from the application point, I've often said that DAS testing is one of the worst technologies in application security for the exact reasons you're outlining, right? The reality of dynamic application security testing is that it only works when you have time windows of release that are broad enough to use a CI/CD pipeline version of an implementation, right? Yep. If you get faster release cycles, you get faster and closer to continuous release, DAS goes sideways. And so my replacement that I've always recommended has been do some kind of IaaS style technology that embeds into the application itself and then move that into your QA so that as you're exercising your code, as you're exercising your application, the IaaS technology picks up on the flaws. And so that to me is the replacement for DAST in that fundamental sense. But I do like the way that you're saying, look, there's a production level of application security that's just not being met today. and that production level of application security can come from continuous DAST, if you want to call it that. But really, it's kind of an extension of attack surface management when you really think about it, in the sense that attack surface management is knowing what you have out there, and ideally finding the vulnerabilities and issues within that attack surface in a faster time frame than others, and then shortening the response time. So does it make sense to run, say, an IAST in conjunction with an external ASM, or is that going to duplicate effort?
Actually, we had exactly this conversation with a customer the other week. My take on it is to get an IAST. I mean, I'm not an expert on them, but my take is that it requires quite a lot of effort to get it running. But to get an attack surface tool running in production requires very little effort. So unless you have something running in production continuously, and that where you can get the vulnerability in and fix it the same day, don't spend efforts on an IAST tool. Then you should get your static code analysis and your software composition analysis done first, and you should get your production level testing, and then bother about adding the complexity of an IAST tool.
So, and then I want to bring up another question I have about attack surface management. It's kind of the external attack surface management view, right? ASM is largely an external vantage point type of scenario today. It reminds me of the old days of the discussion between SAST and DAST, right? SAST is the internal view of your applications. DAST is the external hacker-centric view. There's 100% interesting value in an external hacker-centric vantage point, right? An uninformed vantage point. You get to see some interesting things that you may or may not see from the internal side. So do you recommend running an external ASM in conjunction with, say, a cyber-focused asset management platform from the inside? Do those complement each other in a way that gives external view into things that you may not know are there, that you can't catch?
Yeah, because and I mean, there are, I think the tooling that, for example, okay, let's connect through all my AWS APIs, and that works great if you know the accounts. But yes, that could be true for if you're very modern and cloud native organization. But if you take an organization that is trying to find what cloud providers or hosting providers that you're using based on the invoices that's being sent to your billing email, good luck using that type of tool then. And in the same time, the internal view is dependent on that everybody follows procedures, that people are doing things in the right way, that all accounts are being set up in the right way, that there is no marketing agency used by a company in one of your remote locations, or you have a country manager that wants to run something separate on his side. So I think the outside view is necessary for you. And it's also faster and requires less implementation for you.
So then my follow-on question is that from the Detectify vantage point, do you do external focused predominantly today? Do you have internal components that complement it? And then the actual question to that is, do you see, similar to the way the AST market converged, right? Because I'm an old AST guy. I worked for Veracode when all they had was a SAST, right? And then we added DAST and we added some, SCA and other technologies. Do you see the attack surface management from the outside converging with the inside at some point? And then how does Detectify do it today? Is it outside focused currently?
I mean, it's not unlikely that they will converge, but I think they look for slightly different things. I mean, we have taken a lot of attack surface product today only do profiling and fingerprinting and painting your tech stack. They're actually not that good at security testing. We are coming from the traditional world of security testing, and then we started building out tools for like subdomain takeover, and we built those tools already back, in 2014, 2015, and starting selling them. But then, because then we started doing domain discovery, and then we started to build subdomain takeover testing, and came from that. We are 100% externally facing tool today. And that's the purpose, because also looking at the modern companies, they are going for a perimeter-less zero trust environment. And I mean, some of the tests that we build towards those environments is that, okay, on my engineering domain, I want to make sure that I have the same single sign-on activated on everything. That is, for example, a purpose of an attack surface tool. And that's something that you wouldn't do from the inside, because, okay, where do my domain pointers point? Okay, are all those protected by my specified single sign-on? Otherwise, if they're not, a developer's made a mistake.
Yeah. So another question I have, kind of going in a different direction. Do you find, one of the questions I've been asking a lot of people is who should own this component? Vulnerability management should be centralized within the security team, or should the security team be more of an outsider looking in on vulnerability management, run by maybe a DevOps team or the even a traditional developer team themselves? And I've seen kind of different takes on this, and I'm curious if you find it's easier to sell to one group or the other, and what kind of what your thoughts are on who should have the responsibility of managing the vulnerability piece.
From an attack surface type of product point of view, I actually think this falls outside of engineering. It falls on maybe security engineering, or could also be part of some vulnerability insights or threat intel or similar that would actually own it, because since it covers products and parts that are maybe not built by your internal engineering team, it could be that it's built, some components of what you're exposing are built by internal team, but then you might be using a third-party provider on some parts of your domain that's hosting and delivering some other components, and that might not be part of the engineering team's delivery. And hence, I think that, and also that we're starting to see, as we have shifted the company from more of a traditional DAS, then we had these asset management, and now 100% focused on attack surface, is that the conversation typically happens one level higher up in the organization, because it falls more under, it gets interesting for corporate security, not only for product security.
Yeah, it makes sense.
I know a little while ago, your team put out something on Reddit about the types of web vulnerabilities, the top 10 types of web vulnerabilities that are often missed. Can you give us an update on that and what people should be looking for, what they should be concerned about?
Well, thanks for that curveball. I mean, what we started to see, I think, is there is a lot of risks often in what we're starting to see with attack surface is, okay, have I done something? Okay, I found this Grafana. Should that really be there? I don't know what its data is exposing. So, and what is the patch level of that? That should actually be an internal tool. So that, I think, is a lot of what organizations are seeing, okay, that they might be a bit unaware of, that they are having a different type of security exposure than they had before. I mean, five versions back, OWASP top 10 was fairly good for application security, because then they actually were concrete categories and they were meaning something. Nowadays, it's just a random catch-all unclear fluff in the, for example, OWASP categories. So I think what's coming more and more is related to things. We see more of configuration issues rather than it's pure coding errors. So I would look more into the misconfiguration of new technologies, and that you don't really understand what happens when you're putting all these pieces together. So I think vulnerabilities more and more will arise in combination of technologies rather than in individual, that a developer forgot to do an XSS protection, because that should be a solved problem by now.
Yeah, I think my whole takeaway on the surface monitoring piece is I've not seen a tool or a situation where it didn't find something that was both significant and not known before the tool was used. So in general, I think there's a lot of directions, that this stuff can go in the future, but in general, I don't know if you've had the same experience with your customers, but something that finds something alarming during a POC is, in my experience, a pretty easy tool to sell.
I mean, it's like, oh shit, what happened there? Why is that there? Okay, we need to stop this conversation now. We need to go out and fix it, and we'll come back to you when we resolve this issue. That's not uncommon that it happens to our salespeople. Yeah.
You've seen most of your customers in incident response mode early in the discussions. Yeah. Well, that's very, very interesting stuff, and it's a market that I'm very interested in. Along with just asset management in general, and where vulnerability management's going to go in the future, as I've spent a lot of my career on all these things. But Rickard, thank you very much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today.
Thank you for having me.
And audience, make sure you visit securityweekly.com/Detectify to learn more. I believe they also have a free trial. Yeah, it's pretty easy to get started. We've used it here ourselves. And stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to talk security stories from the trenches with Will Clark from Excella.